Jake Collins had always dreamed of escaping the noise. After years of city traffic and apartment walls so thin he could hear his neighbor's cat sneeze, he'd finally found it. Peace, a modest but beautiful two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, with a wide concrete driveway perfect for his truck, tools, and weekend tinkering. Everything about the place felt right. Except one thing. On moving day, Jake noticed something odd. As the movers unloaded boxes, a woman across the street stood perfectly still on her porch, arms folded, sunglasses reflecting the sun, watching, not waving, just watching. An older man from next door, Frank, shuffled over, pretending to inspect Jake's mailbox. He leaned in slightly, voice hushed. "You might want to ask Karen about where you park. She gets testy." Testy. Jake raised an eyebrow. "It's my driveway." Frank gave a half nod, half winced, and walked away without another word. That night, Jake went outside to grab a box he'd left in the truck, and froze. Something fluttered under his windshield wiper. A neatly folded note. No envelope. No signature. Just 5 typed lines. "You're already violating HOA terms. Improper driveway use. Future violations will incur fines. HOA will be in touch. K." Jake blinked. He'd been in the house for 6 hours. He looked around the cul-de-sac. No movement. Just the faint glow of porch lights and that eerie, suburban silence. Too perfect, like the set of a thriller where the villain always smiles before they strike. The next morning, Jake walked to the edge of his property, scanning for a sign, any sign, that said the driveway wasn't his. There wasn't one, just clean, open concrete and a line of hedges clearly separating his home from the next. Still, that note itched in the back of his mind. Later that afternoon, as Jake carried in the last of his boxes, a sharp knock rattled the door. He opened it to find her, clipboard in hand, sunglasses still on, lips pressed into a tight smile. "Hi, I'm Karen. I'm with the HOA," she said, as if that explained everything. "You've already received your first violation, I assume." Jake crossed his arms. "For parking in my driveway." Karen tilted her head, smile never fading. "Well, the HOA maintains easement rights on certain properties in this neighborhood. Your driveway happens to be part of a shared access route. It's written into the bylaws. You'll want to read those carefully." She handed him a stapled packet, 15 pages thick, and turned without waiting for a response. As she walked away, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and that truck of yours. It's not HOA approved for curb aesthetics." Jake stared at the packet in his hand. No maps, no diagrams, just jargon, bolded threats, and fine print. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, standing on his own driveway, gripping a stack of fake authority, was the beginning of a war. And Karen had just fired the first shot. The next morning, Jake sat at his kitchen counter, coffee untouched, eyes scanning the HOA document Karen had handed him. It read like it was written by a corporate lawyer with a personal vendetta against Joy. No vehicles over $6,000, no non-neutral paint tones visible from the street, and the cherry on top. Shared driveway access may be enforced by the HOA at its discretion. Discretion. That word hit him like a punch. Jake rubbed his temples. What does that even mean? He flipped to the back, expecting a map. Nothing. No reference to his property. No legal documents, just vague clauses and passive threats. The language was more smoke than fire. By noon, he was on the phone with the title company that had closed his mortgage. "Hi, yeah, quick question. Is there an easement or shared access agreement tied to my driveway?" The woman on the line tapped a few keys. "I'm looking at your plat map now." "No, sir. Your parcel includes the full driveway. There's no shared easement recorded." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure?" "Positive. You own every inch of it." The weight of that hit him hard, but not with relief, with realization. Karen wasn't mistaken. She was bluffing. That afternoon, Jake pulled into his driveway and hit the brakes. There it was. Karen's white SUV, parked sideways, dead center across his driveway. She wasn't just pushing limits now. She was staking territory. Jake stepped out and took a long, slow breath. He wasn't a guy who liked drama, but this wasn't some petty HOA note anymore. This was a power move. She was daring him to challenge her. Instead, he walked calmly inside and opened a fresh document on his laptop. Property rights and HOA limitations, a legal review. If Karen wanted to play rulebook roulette, Jake would show up with receipts. That evening, Jake spotted her out front again, gardening, clipping at already perfect bushes with robotic precision. He approached, casual tone. "Hey Karen, I checked with the title office. They confirmed my driveway is fully private. No easement." Karen didn't even look up. "Oh well, they wouldn't know the HOA's agreements. Ours are separate. Internal." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Internal." She finally met his gaze, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. "You're new here, Jake. Things run a certain way. It's best not to stir the pot." There was something in her tone, something chilling. Not a warning. A threat. Jake walked away, heart pounding. She wasn't just making up rules. She was counting on fear to keep people quiet. But fear wasn't in Jake's playbook. If she wanted to claim his land like a monarch, he'd fight back like a legend. The next morning, Jake opened his front door and stopped cold. 3 orange traffic cones stood like sentinels across his driveway. Tied between them was yellow caution tape, and hanging from the middle was a laminated sign. Temporary HOA access point. Do not remove. Karen R/HOA President. His jaw clenched. There was no construction, no roadwork, no reason. It was a declaration. Jake walked down, tore off the sign, and tossed the cones aside like bowling pins. A neighbor across the street paused mid-lawnmower and gave him a silent thumbs up before pretending to check his grass again. Jake could feel it now. Eyes, watching from behind blinds. Curtains twitching. People knew what Karen was doing. They were just too afraid to speak up. Later that day, Jake returned from work to find a new horror. Karen's SUV was back. This time, it wasn't just on his driveway. It was backed up almost to his garage door. A potted plant sat on the hood like some kind of smug offering. He didn't honk. He didn't yell. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos from every angle. Then he walked across the street, rang Frank's doorbell, and asked the old man one simple question. "Has she done this before?" Frank hesitated, then slowly nodded. "You're not the first one she's targeted, but you're the first to fight back." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" Frank sighed. "Because she is the HOA. Her husband helped write half those fake documents years ago. And she's got people scared, threatens fines, calls the city on violations, gets real personal when you push back." Jake nodded slowly, a plan forming behind his eyes. "I think it's time someone showed her she picked the wrong driveway." Frank cracked the tiniest grin. About time. That night, Jake sketched something on a napkin. Not a lawsuit. Not a petition. A blueprint. If she wanted a turf war, he'd turn his driveway into a fortress. But first, he needed proof. He set up a security camera hidden in a birdhouse on his porch, angled directly at the driveway. The next morning, he caught footage of Karen walking over, placing a second sign, and taking photos of his truck, muttering into her phone. Later, another envelope slid under his door. Typed. Cold. Clinical. "You have now accrued 3 violations. A formal complaint has been filed. Your vehicle may be subject to removal per HOA discretion." Jake stared at the letter. No signature. No logo. No legal source. Just fear tactics dressed as authority. His lips curled into a slow smile. He whispered to himself, "All right, Karen. Let's see how you like a taste of the Middle Ages. Jake's mind raced as he stared at the unsigned letter, his hand trembling just slightly as he crumpled it. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this than just a petty dispute over parking. Karen wasn't simply a stickler for rules. She was playing some kind of long game. That night, while the neighborhood slept, Jake sat hunched over his laptop, researching. First, the HOA bylaws. Then, property records, maps, deeds, everything he could find. But no matter how many pages he scrolled, there was one name that kept popping up. Karen R. Edwards. Karen Edwards. The HOA president. No, not just president, a founder. A wave of realization hit Jake like a freight train. He dug deeper into the county property records, clicking on dusty old documents that hadn't been viewed in years. There it was, buried under layers of legal jargon and corporate amendments, an old faded map of the subdivision before it was even a subdivision. The community pool. Jake froze. According to the document, Karen's house had been the HOA office before it was moved to a more centralized location. But the real kicker was in the land description, something he had missed on his initial check. The deed to his house, along with several others on the block, mentioned a common access point that once connected to a community pool that had been torn down over a decade ago. That was the real reason Karen thought she could claim his driveway. She was still clinging to the shared access rights from the original plans, even though the pool was long gone. Jake leaned back, his fingers trembling as he clicked on a historical photo archive. There, in faded black and white, was an image of the old community pool, and standing next to it was Karen. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her. In the background of that photo was a younger, puffed-up version of Karen, wearing an oversized sun hat and standing in front of a crowd of homeowners. She'd been part of the original HOA push. Jake's pulse quickened as he continued scrolling through the archive. There were more pictures. Karen, always in the center of the frame. It was clear now. She wasn't just any neighbor. She had been instrumental in creating this system of fear and control. But that wasn't all. Hidden in the final pages of the archive documents, Jake found a letter. Typed. Official. From the town council. Due to extensive violations and oversight and abuses of power, the HOA board has been officially disbanded. All members, including Karen R. Edwards, are hereby removed from office. The HOA will no longer have any jurisdiction over property disputes. Jake's hands shook as he read it over. It was dated 10 years ago. The HOA had been dissolved. Karen had no power. At least, not legally. But the most chilling part, she hadn't stopped fighting for control. She had just found another way to manipulate the people around her. Jake closed the laptop slowly, his breath steady, but his mind racing. This wasn't just a territorial dispute anymore. Karen wasn't trying to control this driveway. She was using the HOA as a weapon, a ghost organization meant to keep people afraid. And now he had the proof. His smile crept back as a plan began to form in his mind. He wasn't just going to play by her rules. He was going to rewrite the entire game. Jake's fingers danced across the keyboard late into the night, his mind weaving through a labyrinth of ideas. He wasn't just going to fight Karen using her own rules. He was going to redefine the battle entirely. And for that, he needed something spectacular. The medieval idea had come to him in the middle of his research, during a quick break where he flipped through old architectural blueprints for fun. He laughed at himself then, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He would build a fortress. Not a real one. Well, not entirely, but something symbolic, a visual representation of strength. And if Karen wanted to turn his driveway into her personal battleground, he'd give her something she couldn't ignore. By dawn, Jake had already ordered materials. A wooden drawbridge-style gate, old banners, faded but regal-looking. 4 large wooden posts, enough to give the illusion of a castle. He even found a replica of a medieval crest online, which he would slap on the front to make it look official, like it had been here for centuries. But there was more. He tapped into his network of friends, and within an hour, a group of local reenactors, enthusiasts, mostly, had agreed to help. They were more than willing to dress in armor, carry flags, and perform a medieval march if it meant playing their part in Jake's wild plan. By the afternoon, Jake had the setup ready. He'd strung banners high across the fence, and in the middle of his driveway, a large, menacing sign appeared. Private Kingdom of Lord Jake. Trespassers will face the trebuchet. Jake stood back, admiring the sight. The homemade wooden gate, complete with iron nails and fox hinges, stood in stark contrast to his regular suburban house. The banners flapped in the breeze, and the birdhouse security camera, now disguised as a knight's helmet on a wooden stand, looked almost comical but deadly serious. It was a perfect blend of absurdity and brilliance. No one would mistake it for anything but a declaration of war. As the first reenactor arrived, dressed in full medieval garb, Jake grinned. His castle was about to become the epicenter of an HOA showdown. But Karen wasn't going to know what hit her. That evening, as Jake stood proudly at the helm of his homemade kingdom, Karen's silver SUV pulled into view. Jake's heart pounded with anticipation as Karen slowed to a stop in front of the drawbridge, her eyes narrowing behind her oversized sunglasses. She hadn't seen this coming. No one had. Without a word, Jake flicked the rope that acted as a drawbridge mechanism, and the makeshift gate creaked open. A small army of reenactors in shining armor appeared, one by one, holding banners and flags like they were preparing for a royal procession. Jake stepped forward, meeting Karen's gaze, his voice unwavering. "Lady Karen, the road you have walked ends here." Her face twitched. "What is this nonsense?" Jake grinned. "This, my dear Karen, is what happens when you try to rule over lands you do not control. Prepare for the battle of your life." Karen sputtered, her face flushed. She was furious, but now the audience had changed. Neighbors watched from their windows. Frank peeked around the corner with a barely contained grin. The crowd of reenactors stood in full formation, waiting. And then, the next words out of Jake's mouth would leave her speechless. "This is my kingdom now." The silence that followed Jake's declaration was thick enough to slice through with a sword. Karen's face turned an unnatural shade of red, her lips pressed together so tightly it seemed as though they might crack. She stared at the makeshift drawbridge and the medieval reenactors who now stood at attention, awaiting her response. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind rustling through the banners, flapping like they were alive. The neighborhood was watching. Karen was known for being a bulldozer, never backing down, and this wasn't going to be the first time she'd rolled over someone. Jake had crossed a line, and she wasn't about to let him get away with it. She slammed the door of her SUV, her heels clicking on the pavement as she stormed toward the makeshift fortress. "This is absurd, Jake," she hissed, her voice cracking with fury. "You can't. This is a violation of HOA standards. You will take this down, or I will." "I'll what, Karen?" Jake interrupted, his voice smooth, calm. "Report me to the HOA that doesn't exist. I've done my research. You can't intimidate me with your empty threats anymore. This is my driveway, my property." Her face twisted. "You're playing games now. You think you're clever." Jake smiled. "It's not a game. This is my land, my kingdom. And I'm done with you trying to make people cower in fear. You've already tried it with me. But now everyone knows the truth." A few neighbors peered out from behind curtains. Someone from down the street had brought out a lawn chair and was watching the spectacle unfold. Jake could feel the shift in the air. People were starting to side with him. They were beginning to realize Karen's reign of terror was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Karen's eyes flickered nervously as she glanced around, taking in the small crowd now gathered on the sidewalk. The reenactors stood firm, each one holding a flag as if they were preparing for battle. The absurdity of it all seemed to hit her at once. But she wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when her reputation was on the line. With a snap, she whipped her phone out of her purse and began to dial. She muttered something about getting the city involved as she stepped back toward her SUV. But Jake didn't flinch. He stood tall, unshaken. This was his moment. Karen's fingers flew over the screen as she typed a furious message, no doubt preparing to call in every favor she could muster. But something was off. Jake's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a call to city officials. Instead, Karen hit send on a group text that was meant for her own private HOA clique. Her words were frantic, desperate, and yet imploring. Emergency HOA intervention needed. Jake Collins is officially making a mockery of the HOA. I need backup. He's escalating. He's turning the neighborhood against me. I don't know what to do. Jake caught a glimpse of the message before she quickly pocketed her phone, but it was enough. The wheels had started turning. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. Karen was cornered, and she had no idea what was coming next. Karen, Jake called out, his tone icy. You can't control people like you used to. Your games are over. She spun on her heel, face twisting with a mix of anger and panic. You don't know who you're messing with, Jake. This isn't over. I'll have you thrown out of here. But Jake wasn't worried. He had one final move. The reenactors behind him stepped forward, closing ranks like a medieval army preparing for a charge. They raised their wooden swords, not in aggression, but in unity. They weren't just actors anymore. They were part of Jake's defense. And Karen couldn't stand it. Her carefully crafted persona, the fear she had instilled in the neighborhood, was crumbling. People were beginning to see her for what she was, a bully who had lost her grip on power. Her next words came out in a low, desperate hiss, but Jake heard them clearly. You won't get away with this. Jake took a step closer, his smile widening. Oh, but I already have. Karen's fingers curled into fists as she stood there, her breath shallow, her pride slipping from her grasp like sand through her fingers. The reenactors stood firm, their armor glinting in the fading sunlight, and for the first time, she wasn't the one holding the power. Jake stood tall in the middle of it all, his eyes never leaving hers. His smug grin was gone now, replaced with a quiet intensity that radiated like heat. He had already won. She just didn't know it yet. I don't need to make threats, Karen, Jake said, his voice low but cutting through the tension like a blade. I've already shown you that this isn't your kingdom. It never was. Karen stepped back, her eyes darting between Jake and the reenactors. Her mind raced. What had started as a battle over a driveway had turned into a full-scale humiliation. The walls were closing in, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Get out of my way, Karen snapped, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. She marched toward the makeshift gate, eyes locked on Jake's, as if trying to will him to back down. This is ridiculous. I'll have you sued for harassment. You're the one breaking the law here. You have no right. Karen, Jake interrupted, his tone soft but final. This isn't about the law anymore. It's about respect. You've spent years bullying people in this neighborhood, but now you've met someone who won't bow down. The neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalks were watching now, some with raised eyebrows, others with an open smile. Word had already spread that something big was happening, and it wasn't just Jake's strange medieval spectacle. People were beginning to realize the truth. Karen wasn't a ruler. She wasn't untouchable. She was a woman who had lost control, and the community was done being her pawns. Karen's face paled as she turned to see Frank standing in the doorway of his house, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. Frank, of all people, who had always kept to himself, who had never taken sides, was watching her unravel. She had lost him too. You're pathetic, Karen, Frank called across the street, his voice carrying through the growing crowd. You've been running this HOA like a dictator for far too long. We all know what you've done. It's time to put an end to it. The words hit her like a slap to the face. She looked around, her eyes wild, but she couldn't escape. The trap had already been set. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone. But this time, it wasn't a call to an HOA member or city official. It was a desperate attempt to salvage something. Anything. From the wreckage of her reputation. She started typing, her hands shaking. Jake watched her, his gaze unwavering. He knew what she was doing, sending a message to her allies. But it wouldn't help her. Not now. "You're too late, Karen," Jake said with a finality that made her stomach drop. "Your reign is over." He turned to the crowd of neighbors, who were now slowly stepping forward, their faces filled with quiet approval. Jake had done more than stand up for his own property. He had shown them that it was possible to stand together. Karen's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but no words came out. Her eyes locked on the absurdity of her situation. Her fortress, her threats, her power, all gone in the span of a single bold confrontation. Her phone buzzed once, then twice, messages pouring in. Her allies, her enforcers, the ones who had once backed her up, had turned against her. It was over. "Goodbye, Karen," Jake said, the weight of the words settling in the air. The final blow. With nothing left to say, Karen turned, her heels clicking on the pavement as she walked back to her car. The SUV, which had once been the symbol of her power, now seemed like an empty shell, nothing more than a vehicle in the face of a fight she couldn't win. As she drove away, Jake allowed himself a single moment to savor the taste of victory. The war was won, and the neighborhood would never be the same again. The days following Karen's departure were a strange kind of victory, one that felt both sweet and surreal. The neighborhood was still buzzing with the aftermath of Jake's bold stand. The once fearful whispers had turned into cheers. People who had been too afraid to speak up now had something they hadn't had in years: hope. Jake walked his driveway the morning after, the castle still standing in all its absurd glory. The drawbridge was up, the banners flapping lazily in the wind. The medieval touch was now a symbol of his defiance, his unwillingness to be bullied. He couldn't help but grin at the sight. Karen never saw this coming. It wasn't long before the knock came. Jake opened the door to find Frank standing there, holding an envelope in one hand. His weathered face was marked with a rare smile, something Jake hadn't seen in years. "Hey, kid," Frank greeted. "Got something for ya." Jake took the envelope, eyeing the crisp paper inside. "What's this?" "A little something from the neighborhood," Frank said, his tone lighter than usual. "They wanted me to give it to you personally." Jake opened the envelope and pulled out a thick, official-looking document. His eyes scanned it quickly, the words jumping out at him. "To Jake Collins, neighborhood defender and protector. In gratitude for your courage, leadership, and unwavering commitment to the well-being of our community, we hereby declare that Jake Collins has been appointed the unofficial honorary guardian of the neighborhood. Effective immediately." He blinked. "Wait, what? Honorary what now?" Frank chuckled. "Seems like you're more than just a guy with a medieval plan to them. They've made it official. The neighborhood's been trying to make the HOA what it should have been. A group that looks out for everyone. No more Karen-style dictatorship." Jake's jaw dropped. This was insane, but amazing. Karen had created a system of fear, a division that pitted neighbors against each other. But in her fall, something better had been born. Now Jake wasn't just a neighbor anymore. He was the figurehead of a new era, a time of unity. And yet, the greatest twist came that evening. As Jake stood on his porch, admiring the victory, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Jake Collins," came a voice on the other end. "You don't know me, but I'm an attorney with the city council. We've been following your case." Jake's stomach tightened. "Bah, what's this about?" The voice continued. "Karen's been trying to file complaints about your medieval display, but we've checked, and after reviewing everything, we found no violations. In fact, there's something even more important. We've decided to reinstate the HOA's bylaws, with some new amendments. We want you to be part of the drafting committee." Jake blinked. "Wait, What? You're asking me to help rebuild the HOA? That's right. You've set a precedent here. The community deserves better. Your actions have shown us that we need change from the top down. We want you to be a voice for that change. A grin spread across Jake's face. It was happening. The wheels of reform were already in motion. The very thing Karen had tried to control, now she had no part in. That evening, Jake walked back outside and looked around his quiet street, now filled with neighbors chatting on their front porches, nodding at him with respect. The world had shifted, and he had, in his own way, made it happen. For the first time in years, the community felt like it was his again, theirs again. And in the back of his mind, Jake knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.